Hello and welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the early morning programming for the NASA iTech Forum. We are going to continue on with our next innovator, Crystal Eisenhower for Aperiomics.
When Mindy Alexander's now 3-year-old daughter, Eliana, kept getting sick, she and her husband, John, were at a loss.
When Eliana was 2, she had 4 strep infections in just over 6 months. After the last round of antibiotics, she started exhibiting UTI pains.
And her pain continued for months after, yet doctors couldn't give them a diagnosis.
We ended up going to our pediatrician and urgent care for about 6 or 7 visits, and everything was coming back normal and clear.
Desperate, Mindy, like most parents, turned to the internet and found Virginia-based Aperiomics, a biotechnology company that says they can help solve medical mysteries.
We were very, very frustrated, upset, and just looking for answers.
Aperiomics CEO, Dr. Crystal Eisenhower, helped start the company in 2014 with one goal: to help doctors and chronically ill patients figure out what's making them sick.
We aim to change everything about how infections are identified. We know that there are millions of people living with chronic infections, and the current system can't identify those. The tests simply don't exist. Instead of looking for one thing at a time, we're looking for everything that's known at a time. So we screen every sample for over 37,000 possibilities.
The company insists they don't diagnose or treat patients directly. Rather, with Eliana's test results, her own doctors were able to treat her specific strain of infection. And within a month, her symptoms were completely gone.
I assumed that a standard UTI culture would cover everything that could cause a UTI. And I've since learned that's just not the case.
Today, Eliana is healthy and thriving, and her family is grateful.
Hello, I'm Dr. Crystal Eisenhower, CEO of Aperiomics. Aperiomics' mission is to advance healthcare by revolutionizing the way infection is identified. Now more than ever, the world is painfully aware of the negative impacts undiagnosed infection can have because of the economic and health impacts that COVID has caused on the entire globe. Aperiomics technology is able to identify every known bacterium, virus, parasite, and fungus in one test. This technology has many applications to NASA, including pre-screening astronauts before flight and studying our microbial footprint left in space. Our technology has been used for over 3 years to help patients all over the world, just like Eliana, get answers that no other test could provide. The problem at its root is that infections are simply not identified. This is because traditional testing is incapable of identifying the majority of microorganisms that can cause infection in humans. For example, standard laboratory cultures can identify only 10% of known microorganisms. Our technology, Xplore-PATHO, allows identification of every known microorganism by looking at the genetic blueprint for each bacterium, virus, parasite, and fungus. So how does Xplore-PATHO work? Xplore-PATHO is better infection testing. The first part of what we do is wet lab sequencing. We start with a sample from the patient. That sample should be from the source of the infection. So if somebody has a chronic urinary tract issue, we want a urine sample. We work with many different types of samples, including blood, tissue, urine, fecal. We also do environmental testing and working with pharmaceutical companies, so this has broad applications beyond the clinical application we're focused on. We take these samples and pull the DNA out of them and test them for every known bacterium, virus, parasite, and fungus. And we do this using deep DNA sequencing. DNA sequencing technology has been used for cancer and genetic testing for several years, and we are now applying it to infection testing. This produces a very comprehensive, very complex data file that can be up to 1 terabyte of data for just one patient sample. The second piece of our technology is our dry lab analytics. This is the core of our technology. We are effectively a software company. The massive data file from a patient sample is analyzed through our algorithms, matched against our databases, and then our artificial intelligence is applied. The goal of our analytics is to generate a report that identifies and quantifies every known microorganism, as well as key information about the microorganisms to help healthcare providers understand how the sample is different from healthy. Beyond that, we also provide consultation services to the healthcare providers because we want to make sure that that healthcare provider has everything that they need to be able to understand the report that has every known microorganism, how much is there, and context about what kind of impact this may have on the patient. We oftentimes refer healthcare providers to other doctors that have similar patients, but also infectious disease pharmacists that can help those healthcare providers figure out what to do next if infection is indeed their diagnosis. The first portion is the software. These are dozens of modular algorithms that use a unique statistical strategy to identify the unique information in each sample. Next is our genome management system. This is a comprehensive, dynamic, and high-quality system that we've developed. It contains the complete genetic information for every known microorganism. Right now, this is nearly 40,000 microorganisms, again, every known bacterium, virus, parasite, and fungus. Within that 40,000 microorganisms, over 12,000 of them have been documented to cause disease in humans. To give some context, the Centers for Disease Control tracks about 350 microorganisms. We are the only company in the world that is tracking every known microorganism that causes disease in humans. The third piece is our machine learning, which is designed to put context around the microorganisms identified. But if we don't put context around that information to help them understand how this is different from healthy, then the doctor oftentimes doesn't know what to do with this information. Aperiomics began operations in 2014, and our mission is to advance healthcare and revolutionize infection testing. And we've built an amazing team. In addition to our highly experienced management team, we have technical, clinical, operations, and sales experts that are all committed to our mission. We also have strong advisory teams and an active board of directors. The market that we serve are healthcare providers that treat infection. This can be anyone from a nurse practitioner to an infectious disease physician and anyone in between. Putting a size on this market is very difficult. This not only includes things that we traditionally think of as infections, but also things that we're increasingly connecting to infections. Some of these are considered autoimmune conditions, some of these are considered chronic conditions. We do know that pathogens tracked by CDC result in about 200 million infections per year in the US. We know that this is an underestimate for all infection. But starting with this number and drilling down through our addressable market puts us at an annual US market of $39 billion at our out-of-pocket price of $789 per sample. Aperiomics is clearly set apart by the fact that we identify thousands more microbes than possible by any others. Our biggest competition are healthcare providers that never have a definitive test for infection. There are also labs that do infection testing. These use various technologies, including culture, which we've talked about, but also DNA-based technologies. These other DNA-based technologies can only identify a fraction of what we are able to identify through our technology. Our new paradigm for infection testing is already making an impact in how healthcare providers operate. Instead of running test after test, Aperiomics simply identifies everything known. We also provide context around the information so that the healthcare providers have the best possible information to come up with an appropriate plan for treating that patient. This paradigm shift has already allowed us to identify infection where all other testing has failed. One example is Mary. She is 58 years old and has suffered for 37 years with debilitating chronic bladder pain. She has had symptoms of a severe urinary tract infection for decades, but existing urine culture tests have been incapable of identifying the root cause of her infection. They've told her that she has a condition called interstitial cystitis, which is an autoimmune condition with no known cause and no known cure. This condition disproportionately impacts females and the elderly. Mary learned about our testing through a patient advocacy group and requested that her doctor order our urine test. We received her urine sample in our lab. We pulled the DNA out of that sample and then used deep DNA sequencing to analyze over 20 million fragments of DNA from that sample. From that data, we were able to identify a unique bacteria that is incapable of growing in urine culture. Based on our testing, her pain finally resolved. Our technology creates a true win-win scenario. Patients can finally get better or simply never become chronically ill in the first place. Healthcare providers can get these patients out of the revolving door of their practices, and insurance companies stand to save hundreds of thousands of dollars on cases such as Mary's, or even better, prevent them from becoming these chronic cases that cost the healthcare system so much. And the beauty is that the quality of care was not sacrificed. We have made substantial progress in our 3.5 years on the clinical market. We've received substantial funding from the National Science Foundation through their Small Business Innovation Research Program. We have also worked with over 1,200 clinicians all over the world, helping thousands and thousands of patients. We have generated about $3.5 million in service revenues, most of which is from patients that are paying out of pocket because insurance hasn't provided broad coverage for what we're doing just yet. We've also raised capital from angel investors in the amount of $3 million. We're currently raising a Series A round and looking for syndicate partners. That said, our most notable accomplishment is that we recently received our first Medicare payment for our urine testing. This is a huge milestone for us and opens the door for broad insurance coverage, which will give better access to patients for our testing and help us achieve our mission. As Aperiomics moves forward, our vision is to become the gold standard for all infection testing. Becoming the gold standard means that patients developing chronic conditions will significantly decrease. Some examples include autoimmune conditions like interstitial cystitis, such as Mary's case. Neurological conditions such as Alzheimer's, some forms of autism, and depression are also linked to changes in the intestinal tract. Chronic conditions such as obesity, some forms of diabetes, and cardiovascular disease are also in this category. As we compile data from tens of thousands of patients, the use of big data tools and artificial intelligence will allow our technology to become predictive. An example might be going to your healthcare provider for your annual checkup, and they identify a bacteria that in the future we associate with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So the healthcare provider gives you a prophylactic treatment for this bacteria to reduce your risk or potentially even eliminate your risk for developing this cardiovascular disease in the future. Remember, we are testing for nearly 40,000 microorganisms in each sample. This is far greater than any technology that NASA is using at this time. There are many applications to the space industry with our technology. There are medical applications and there are scientific applications. Imagine a world where astronauts can be pre-screened for infection before flight. This could reduce the risk of an individual astronaut developing an infection, but can also prevent others they work with from contracting an infection. What about a world where astronauts can be post-screened to study the effects of spaceflight on their health? What if an astronaut develops an infection in space? DNA sequencing can be deployed to space stations to identify infection in astronauts. Our technology can also be applied to countless scientific questions that have huge bearing on NASA. What happens to microorganisms at zero gravity? What impact do humans have on in-space environments? The human body contains 6 pounds of microorganisms. With every breath and every skin cell that sheds from our bodies, we are leaving behind a tiny trail of microorganisms everywhere we go. What impact might this have on new environments that we're creating in space? We can also help discover new microorganisms. What if microorganisms we carry into space mutate and evolve into new types of microorganisms that have negative impacts on humans or environments in space? Or what if we find life on other planets? This technology could be used to help unravel those mysteries. Aperiomics is poised to disrupt healthcare. To achieve this mission, we need additional resources. The first is to secure additional funding. As I mentioned, we are running a Series A financing round now and looking for syndicate partners. We also need to perform broad marketing and education. We need to help healthcare providers, patients, and insurance companies understand the true value of what we're doing. Given the fact that our technology is a paradigm shift, the amount of marketing and education is significant. We also need to secure additional insurance coverages. As I mentioned, Medicare has provided their first payment for our urine testing, and that's a huge first step. But there's a lot of work to do in order to get additional insurance companies to follow suit with Medicare and provide additional coverages for our testing. This will give patients better access to our technology as well as help achieve our mission of getting this technology into broad use. With your support, Aperiomics can achieve our mission to advance healthcare and revolutionize infection testing and improve human and astronaut health. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll open up for questions.
This is Dallas.
Go ahead.
This is Dallas. I have a couple of questions. Can your test identify COVID-19 today? How fast is your testing process? And can you identify unknown DNA sequences?
So we are able to identify COVID today. Had we been testing the samples that were originally in China before the pandemic began, our system would have called SARS, which would have been slightly incorrect, but it would have been a major red flag. So our technology has huge implications for being able to get in front of something like the pandemic we're experiencing now. Our testing takes right now, we can run it in as fast as 3 days. But right now, our standard turnaround time, because we have to batch samples together to keep the cost down, runs between 7 and 14 days. And then what was your last question?
To identify unknown DNA sequences, new diseases or new pathogens.
Yes. So we have when we analyze the DNA, it goes into different categories, and one of those categories is called unclassified, and that includes everything that doesn't match to something that's known. We can go into that information and do de novo assembly and align it to things that it's most closely related to. So yes, we do have that capability, and we're going to be building some new tools around that.
Thank you.
Julian?
Great. Yeah. No, it's a great segue to my question, and based on what Dallas was saying, is what is your data source? Are you building? Do you have your own proprietary data source, or you're kind of licensing data from other entities?
So we pull data from various public sources. When scientists discover something and they sequence it, they publish those sequences online publicly. Now, that is not a quality controlled system, and it's also not peer reviewed. So we've had to build an infrastructure that will quality control all of these genetic sequences so that we only include things in our system that are validated and are what they say they are. So just an example of exactly how dirty the system is, there are over 100,000 microorganisms that have been sequenced. We include nearly 40,000 in our system because a lot of what's been published by researchers is not of suitable quality for clinical use.
I have a quick question for you. How resilient is your diagnostics to sequencing errors?
So we use Illumina platforms, Illumina DNA sequencing platforms, and they have the lowest error rate that sequencing platforms can have. There are also some built-in correction systems that Illumina uses to prevent those sequencing errors. So I don't have a hard number of what our error rate is, but it is as low as it can possibly be with this technology.
Hi, so this is Rick Stockberger. So use of these proceeds is going to go into a lot of education, it sounds like. Can you dig a little bit deeper on what that education process looks like and what you feel like the best forms of education are for your customers?
Yes, so a lot of that will be in the form of trade shows, and actually we have one coming up in just a couple of weeks, the Infectious Disease Society of America's ID Week. So we have a booth, we have posters a poster that we're presenting at that event. So getting in front of large groups of people to help educate them on the value of what we're doing. So that's one of the biggest ways, but also peer-reviewed publications, which we have several in the works, going and doing speaking engagements. PR has been a really, really big thing. The Today Show piece that we had at the beginning of our segment, that was an amazing opportunity. And if you ever want to crash a website, get on the Today Show.
Great, thank you.
May I ask another? Yeah, I mean, ask another question. So your business model is to identify what we call in medicine occult infections. In a sense, aren't you kind of cannibalizing yourself by solving a problem? And therefore, especially when some of these occult infections, are kind of a one-time event. I understand if it's a patient with chronic disease like interstitial cystitis, but oftentimes it's an occult infection, and if you solve it, then you're limited in terms of your true market. Could you touch on that a little?
Well, yes. So I don't see this as cannibalizing ourselves. People get sick many times in their lives. We all have infection after infection after infection, sometimes with the same exact things over and over again. So what we're doing is we're trying to get in front of this process where instead of the healthcare provider making an educated guess or using answers from existing laboratory tests that are incomplete, if not inaccurate, and preventing people from getting into these chronic phases, but also the predictive ability of what we'll be able to do when big data becomes part of this is huge. Being able to predict where this is a regular part of the annual screening process. So I don't really see us cannibalizing our own business, but really creating new opportunities as the technology matures.
John Carr?
Yeah, hey, this is John. Can you help me understand the size of the wet lab portion? Are we talking about 700, square foot lab or something the size of a 3D printer?
So our laboratory is about 2,000 square feet total, and there's plenty of extra space in there. So this could be, the footprint of this could be fairly small. And I know that there has been DNA sequencing performed in space. So this certainly could be applied in very small confined spaces.
Ben, you had a question?
Hey, Crystal. This is Ben Lockman. Can you talk a little bit more about your competitors and what else is out there that's kind of in your space? What differentiates you guys from other people that are out there? Thanks.
Sure. So one of the most notable competitors is a company called Carius. They do DNA sequencing, but only from blood. We work with virtually any type of a sample, including non-human. There's all kinds of non-human applications here. They only identify about 1,500 microorganisms. We're approaching 40,000. And they only work in a hospital setting. We work with any healthcare provider that is legally able to order a laboratory test. So they are looking at a very defined, segmented part of the market, and we're a much more broad application. So that's probably the closest competitor. There's some other software tools that are similar. There's a lot of advantages. We've benchmarked against everything we can, and we outcompete all of those software tools. Most of those tools come out of academic settings. Ours did. However, we had to go through some substantial work to create something that was suitable for use in a human.
Sherman, you had a question?
Yes. How you doing, Crystal? Really excited to talk to you. I've been covering down on life science tools and diagnostics for about 8 years now. So, very passionate about this space. So the first question is, do you either have the ability now or are you developing in the future to send kits to labs, or are you just focused on having your own central lab? That's my first question.
Sure. So we actually don't want to be a lab at all. We have a lab and we do the wet lab piece because we needed to create the market and create the access to that sequencing. How we scale is we teach other people how to do the wet lab part. That is special know-how. It's very complicated and requires a lot of sophisticated personnel and equipment. Our business is software. So eventually this will be a software as a service where we can distribute this far and wide. And our outlook will be through acquisition. My perfect scenario would be Illumina acquiring us and embedding the system into their instrument, so you have a sample in, answer out application. Oh, I can't hear you.
You mentioned that you at the very end there. First, you said folks are paying out of pocket. I think $750, and then you said something along the lines of you just got some sort of reimbursement. What was the CPT code? And if it wasn't that, then did you get it from like a payer provider? Like, how did that work?
Yes, so we actually have had some out-of-network insurance coverage with several private payers for the last 2 years. So Blue Cross, United, and Cigna provide out-of-network coverage. We have 5 codes that we stack together because there's different parts from sample collection to processing to data analysis. So there's multiple codes that get stacked from the private insurance standpoint. With Medicare, you can only bill 1 code, and so you have to go through a process to get a Z code. I don't know the Z code off the top of my head, but we have one. We're a Medicare provider, and we were able to get that through Medicare. We're in the process now of validating the Medicare payment process and getting our framework in place to do a formal launch of our Xplore-PATHO urine testing. That will be, we're looking at a November launch for that right now.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions.
This is Dallas. I'm going to jump back in. How do you get tested by Aperiomics?
The only thing you need to do is have a supportive healthcare provider. And if you don't have one, we have worked with over 1,200 doctors all over the world. We may have one either near you or one that does remote care. So really, it's just a matter of talking to your healthcare provider and determining if infection is something that makes sense from the symptoms and looking at blood work and such. And then we work with the doctor to make sure the right samples collected at the right time.
Would any provider know of your company?
Not yet. We have a lot of providers that know about us, but that's part of the next phase of this. Getting that insurance piece in place was really necessary before we go and start broadly educating the healthcare providers, because most healthcare providers are going to be hesitant to recommend their patient pay $800 for a lab test.
So the patient would have to know of you and bring it to the doctor's attention.
Yes, and that's how we have operated for 3.5 years. We've generated over about $3.5 million almost exclusively from patients finding us online and taking us to their doctor.
Okay, final question.
Hey, Crystal, this is Peter Hughes from Goddard. Great presentation, great product, exciting position. I can't wait to discuss it with you at the impact table, some applications for new life detection as we explore the outer planetary system. So well done, great job. Can't wait to talk to you guys.
Thank you, it was a pleasure.
Can I ask one quick question? So can you talk about any penetration with payer providers or potentially penetration with the VA or DOD?
We haven't tried to get into the VA or DOD yet, because our primary focus has been educating patients and proving that there's a market and that people will pay for this and that it's clinically valuable. So we haven't made that next step, but that's certainly a great use of this. Mental health is being increasingly connected to gut health, and we can do that in a way that could potentially be a profound impact on the veterans specifically.
All right, thank you, Crystal. Max, back to you.
Thanks, Crystal. Can't wait to see some more discussion on that in the impact tables. Great talk. Congratulations to to all the participants and especially to the winners. Before we head out, I want to just give a big thank you to the NIA team. You guys have done a great job. This was my first event, and between the interactions that we had with the companies, but also all of the facilitating that's been done, all of the work and the coaching, and quite frankly, you guys holding my hand through this as I learned it too. I really appreciate all of you guys. And this was a great experience for me, and I think it's been a great experience for everybody. So thank you guys. I want to make sure that anybody who's watching the live stream right now, that you guys are aware that we have our Cycle 2 event coming up on October 15th and 16th. So please join us for that, where we will have another round of 10 companies showing us how their dual-use technology can benefit NASA while still stimulating commercial markets. Thank you.